Hey Guildies, Fletch here. So today we're going to talk about expert apprentice, or really what we're going to talk about is what is the difference between, junior, senior, expert, novice, all those sort of things, and how it affects you and how it affects the industry, all that sort of stuff. Feel free to jump inside of Techlahoma Slack, slack.techlahoma.org, and make sure that you follow their rules. And we are operating out of user group SEA, which is software engineering and architecture. But also we have the guild channel, and so this is partially a guild talk and also partially a user group software engineering and architecture talk. And we're using the OKC Sharp mixed with OKC Sharp right now, as we during this year transition to end up splitting those two things away into separate things, or completely converting OKC Sharp over. So if people in here are used to OKC Sharp, and you want to end up taking that over, keep talking with me inside of Slack. But if not, then maybe it'll just meld in officially to user group SEA eventually. Okay, so this whole talk is about a paradigm shift in the industry, and it's not really like a shift like we're going to change things. It's more like we want to course correct back toward words meaning things, words meaning what they originally meant. A lot of the words have been watered down, so we're being a bit defensive about things that affect our profession. So, for example, if somebody says, I'm, I don't know, something that I'm not. If somebody says that I am a Python developer when I've never even done Python before, for example, we're not talking about technologies. We're talking about like skill levels in the industry and what they mean and stuff like that. But being defensive about what we mean, so that whenever we see job titles or job postings, and we want to read those job postings and apply for those job postings, it means what we think they mean. And not only that, but if we apply to a job posting that means what we think it means, it also pays what we expect it pays, so that there's no ambiguity between those things, and we sort of have this foundational idea of what things mean. So in order to do this, we have to hold ourselves to standards. So we can't tell HR departments or managerial people or recruiters, we can't tell them to follow rules that we ourselves don't understand and haven't set standards for and haven't defined, rules that we don't follow. So these are rules for the IT industry that we're trying to set a standard for, set some definitions for, and we have to hold ourselves to these standards so that we can then begin this paradigm shift back to course correct, back to normal, so that our industry can all benefit from the proper definitions. So I'm offended by the blatant pains caused by these topics whenever I see a lot of job postings, and they're offensive to me because I know they're going to end up being toxic or hurting some junior developer or mid-level professional, and I constantly want to I do talk to recruiters about this sort of thing all the time, and they're very receptive to this sort of information. But I get offended when I see it, and that it's happening more and more in the industry, or I'm noticing it more and more in the industry. That could be very well be what it is. So we'll talk about seniority. Seniority is sort of its whole own concept. Junior developer, senior developer, or junior developer, senior developer. These are the types of titles that you hear when you talk about seniority. And seniority is it's not a skill level, is sort of the simplest way to put it. So here's just a question. If I have 10 years of experience and sufficient skill, does that mean I'm a senior? And so that's sort of one of the things that we're answering, one of the questions that we're answering here in this talk. So if I join Microsoft or join some big company, and I go into meet with a whole group of people who've been there for a long time, and they've been working with Microsoft for like 20 years, am I the junior person on the team? Because that's not saying anything about my skill level. It's just saying I'm the junior person on the team, right? And so what about the opposite? What if I have 30 years of experience and I'm a consummate professional? I've been in the industry for a long time, and I join Microsoft I've been with Microsoft for 20 years, and then somebody else with more experience than me joins the team. Do they become the senior on the team because they have more experience, or am I the senior person There's a lot of numbers that we need to sort of decouple ourselves from the numbers and more talk about what these terms mean, because we're not talking about skill levels when we talk about seniority. We're talking about people. We're talking about connections and communication schemes and teams. So seniority, when you talk about who is the senior person versus who is the junior person, who are the middle, just the developers or whatever the case is, we're talking about seniority when we're dealing with people and teams and communication and stuff like that. So are they related to time, or are they related to a workplace? We're going to go into a little bit about that right here. Seniority not equals authority, but seniority and authority, they're correlated. So it's a relationship between people. If you're hiring somebody into a position and there's 10 people on the team, and they're all high skill level or whatever the case is, and they're led by somebody who's been there the longest. So time plays a part in that case because they've been there the longest, perhaps. This person's been with the company for the longest person. They are the senior developer. So in that case, they're called senior developer. But senior is a job position. It's not something that's in the industry. If you went to a conference and there's a bunch of web developers in the audience, you wouldn't be able to say senior people go over here, junior people go over here, because seniority is something that happens when you're on a team and you have some sort of like a rank in a company or whatever the case is over somebody else. And on the opposite of that, the junior level of seniority, it means, well, for seniority, it means, you make the final decisions. You're at the top, the junior developers and the mid-level developers, they're all talking to you, giving their ideas. We think we should use this framework, or we think we should use this pattern. And the senior person is the one who ends up making the final call. If that even has to be a thing. Sometimes they can just do their normal development. Junior people are sort of the opposite. They can, of course, still give input, but being the junior person on the team, you're mostly giving input and less likely to be making the final call for some sort of like a product decision or whatever the case is. If these types of things are confusing, then stop saying them. Let's stop talking about junior and senior. In the more common / correct way of using them, if there's a job posting saying we're looking for somebody to be a senior software engineer, they shouldn't be saying they're looking for somebody in the industry who's called senior software engineer. They should be saying this person's in the industry, they're a software engineer, which automatically denotes that they're expert level because software engineering, watch my other talk that I did a couple weeks ago, what engineer means. So we're looking for a software engineer. And when we bring them on, they're going to be in charge of a team. Even if the people have been there, there's a bunch of other developers there that have been there for 5 years or whatever the case is, you're going to come on and directly start leading the team. So you're going to have to get spun up real quick and learn our processes and all that sort of stuff. But we're hiring you into a senior position. There's no such thing as seniority in the industry, but we're hiring you into a senior position in our company. So this idea of junior and senior is a seniority thing, and we want to promote the idea that seniority is something that is a team-based thing that's inside of a company, something like that. But talking about skill level, so moving from company-based seniority into industry-based skill level. So skill level, this is the only time I talk about actual years, like sort of like a hard number for years. It's not really a hard number, but for me, what I believe is a novice or an apprentice. I'll talk about apprentice. I'll differentiate that later. But a novice is anyone with less than 2 years of experience, give or take, or whatever the case is. If you get out of school and you have a year and some change of experience, you should not be applying as an expert to a company, for example. Expert requires a thing called experience, and it doesn't just mean, experience doesn't mean knowledge, and experience doesn't mean IQ level or ability or anything like that. Experience is a very important thing that brings along with it a lot of benefits. And it's not a bad word to say the word novice. That's a big concept I try to get across here. Now, if you say novice and it's because the industry is paying novices 10 cents an hour or something like that, 1 banana an hour, whatever the case is, if that makes you nervous, that's the point of this talk. You should be comfortable to say, I only have a year of experience, out of school, and I've been an intern or whatever the case is, programming away, trying to learn from others and pick up what I can. It shouldn't be toxic to say I'm a novice, and you shouldn't fear being underpaid because you have a lot of value. You should be paid 60 bananas. I'm just sort of continuing the bananas thing from the previous talk that I did. If you feel that saying that you're a novice because you have less than a couple years of experience means that you're going to get paid less, or that you're going to feel judged or feel negative. That's the whole point of this talk, is that we want to normalize these words so that we have this paradigm shift in the industry, that we can use these words appropriately. So if you have less than 2 years of experience, definitely call yourself a novice, and expect that recruiters and managers will treat you as somebody who's coming in and still learning. You're still in the learning phase. They're not going to be assigning you the job of architecting their entire system or something like that. They're definitely not paying you for something like that. They're not paying you for that level of skill or that level of knowledge or experience. So anything up to any length of time. So also, if you've been working for 20 or 30 years, you could still be a novice. Definitely, if you have less than 2 years experience or something like that. This is my own number. This is the only time I put a number really in stone here. If you have less, then you're definitely a novice. But you could happily be a novice with 30 years of experience. That's because you prioritize whatever your hobbies are, or your family, or whatever the case is, and you do this job at a novice level happily. You just code monkey. You just sit there and put in some things, copy paste a couple things here, and make things functionally work. And that's perfectly fine. That's what you want to do. You're a code novice. You haven't dedicated your life to the industry. So I will move on to professional. So after that two-year thing, at some point after that, not when you hit the 2-year mark, but at some point after that, you get to this point where you can complete any general development that field or that job requires of you. So you're in this job, let's say software developer, and you can do any task. So any company or whatever the company you're with, they can throw any task at you to do software development, and you can get it done. You can functionally make the stuff work, and therefore you are a professional. You can demonstrate that you have the ability, the skills, a bit of time in the seat, a little bit of experience, then you can get it done. But also, you can communicate your work details. And this is really the big thing that sets a novice apart from a professional, is that with a certain amount of experience and a certain amount of working with a company or a couple companies, not only can you say, I made this thing work, but this is how I made it work. Where a novice might say, might take some code off of Stack Exchange or another code base, following a pattern or a standard inside the company, and copy paste it and then write some tests against it even, and do all these great things, and their code works. But maybe the code that they copy pasted is also doing something else that they don't realize, which might not be harmful, might just lower performance. So they can't really explain why the thing is that they work. Not as much as a professional. So professional, when they're doing things, they can explain what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so you can act professional. Acting professional is, of course, a very important part of being professional. So 80% of the workforce, I'm going to go back here. I said 10% of the workforce here for a novice. I went back a screen here. Novices, the workforce, the software development workforce doubles about every 5 years. I think it's slowed down over the last couple iterations of 5 years, but as Robert C. Martin, Uncle Bob, points out multiple times, the workforce doubles about every 5 years for the software development agency. And that equates right now to about 10% of the workforce are novices. I say 80% of the workforce are professionals because it's a huge gray area. Like there's professionals from this range to this range, and there's so many things you can do. Sometimes you do web development, sometimes you do API development, sometimes you're being a DBA, and there's this whole area that it's not my job or your job or anyone's job to try to break down the professional workspace into like little categories of different skill levels, because they're mended. It's a gradient of all kinds of different things, and it's impossible to break down. And some people who place themselves at the lower end of professionalism are a lot smarter than they think, and they're way better. They're closer to expert or whatever the case is. And a lot of people who call themselves higher end professionals, if not experts, are a lot closer to the lower end of professionals, which is, it's all perfectly fine. It's a huge gray area, but that's why I say 80% of the workforce is professional. The only way we can really narrow down the professional is to narrow down those edges. So we're going to say novices about 10%, experts we're going to say about 8%. So an expert is somebody who has many, it's ambiguous, but it's multiple years of experience. You don't go from that 2 years of novice experience and say, I hit the 2 years, I'm an expert. It's going to be more than that. It's going to be somewhere up there. For me, I say somewhere around 10 years, to be an expert in software engineering. Give or take 2 or 3 years. Also, somebody with 30 years might not even be an expert of software engineering. It sort of depends. But that sweet spot for me is about 10 years. If you're like genius level IQ and you dedicate yourself to the practice, maybe as low as 7, something like that, whatever the case is. But it's definitely not from novice to expert. You have this. I didn't focus on Journeyperson, but the professional space is a journeyman or journeywoman space where you're going from place to place and seeing how it's done in a lot of other places. So as a novice, you're learning sort of the foundational principles, and then you're building upon that as a journey person, going from place to place, from company to company, or maybe within a single company, you're going like from one org chart to a different org chart, and you're seeing a bunch of different ways of doing things. And as an expert, you have that multiple years of experience, multiple managers or clients. Like I just said, it could be different parts of an org chart. But it wouldn't be, I started working for this company when I was 20. I'm now 40 years old, and I've been doing the same thing, and people praise me. People love me, and this manager will attest that I'm the best person on the team or whatever the case is. But you've been working in one project, so that wouldn't count to make you an expert, because an expert requires experience. And so if your only experience is this one thing, then that's not going to qualify you as an expert. An expert is somebody who's had their hands on a lot of different things in the same field. So I'm in the same field. I've touched this, a lot of different ways, a lot of different frameworks and languages, or whatever the case is. And not only that, but you don't only know the principles. You don't only know the principles as an expert, but you never do anything without keeping the principles in mind. So if you're a professional, you're learning those principles. Not as a novice, you learn the foundational principles. As a professional, you're learning those higher level principles and even some lower level practices, and you're starting to apply them. And you're thinking about them, and you're getting the experience by moving from place to place or different layers of the project or whatever the case is. And as an expert, you know all the principles. You know all the things required to call yourself an expert. Give or take a little bit of wiggle room at the very end there. You don't have to know every single thing every single time. A new principle just arose within some community and I've never heard of it. But as an expert, you know all the things for this field, for this job that you do. You are an expert because you know all of the principles of those things, and you always think about those things. And that's about 8% of the workforce. I was supposed to say this. There's no level above expert. If you're an expert, you're the top level. You're the person who every company wants to come and give you all the money to come do all the things for us. And that's why it's such differentiation from professional, that if you're an expert, you are the top level. And I say it's the top level before I go on to a master or mastery, sort of as a joke a little bit. Because a master is the same as an expert. The difference between a master, someone who's a master of their craft, who has mastery of their craft, and an expert is that someone who's a master is a teacher. So just like a teacher you can't be a teacher without a student. You can't be a sifu without whatever the opposite of a sifu is, a student. Or a sensei, you can't be a sensei without a student. It's the same thing with a master. So a master is an expert, but it's somebody who's going from company to company consulting, or they're doing talks at conferences, or they're mentoring people. You can't be a master without a student. So a master could have 1, 2, 3 mentorships going on at the same time. Maybe 1 or 2 or 3 clients who they're consulting for. Whatever the case is, it's not. You're not going to find someone in this type of position saying, "I have this whole company. This whole company or these 50 people are my students," or whatever the case is. We're talking about mentorship, focused mentorship, where you're one-on-one with people. It's not going to be the same if you have like whole groups of people or something like that. And here I say 2% of the workforce. Like I said, they're the expert level people, but they're sort of a sliver of those people who maybe a little bit more extroverted, or they get over their introvert tendencies and they go and talk to people. They do training, they do stuff like that, mentorship. So I'm going to jump back over here to junior versus senior. These terms are silly. Junior expert or senior expert. These are silly terms because you're mixing up company seniority level terms, which are junior and senior, with sort of industry level ideas, which is expert, professional, or novice or something like that. So you can't be a junior expert. You can't, if you're an expert at something, you're not going to be taking a junior title at a company. At worst, you go into a company and you're not the senior person, you're just part of the staff or whatever the case is. You're an expert, but you're amongst a group of experts, and they may end up having a team lead who they're going to call the expert. And they may even shuffle that around. Like this year, you're the team lead, the next year, someone else is going to be the team lead. They shuffle that around so they get some fresh ideas. But being experts, they know they're not going to shift it too much. They're just going to sort of make little changes and eventually become to, anyway. Senior expert also doesn't make sense. If you're an expert, then of course you're a senior level person, but when you go into a job, whether or not they give you a senior title is sort of a thing. But expert is an industry level thing, whereas seniority is a team level thing, something inside of a company. So the same thing with junior apprentice versus senior apprentice, but the opposite. That if you're an apprentice, of course you're going to be if you join a company. An apprentice isn't necessarily directly related to a company. I get into that here in a second. But if you're an apprentice and you're interning at a company, of course you're going to be in a junior level position, like I talked about junior level earlier on. And a senior apprentice doesn't really make sense. It's silly. Not to say that like in college, if you're a student, there's not like a senior student, what do they call it, TA, teacher's assistant or something like that. They're like the senior student. They're the best in the class. They're getting the highest scores or whatever the case is. They help grade papers or answer questions or whatever the case is. But they're not senior. They don't teach. The TA shouldn't be teaching the content. They may be reviewing notes and helping people understand things in general. But also, we're not talking about college here. We're not talking about college students. We're talking about apprenticeships. And so apprentices shouldn't be teaching other apprentices. So there's no such thing as a senior apprentice. These are sort of silly titles. So yeah, seniority, which is junior, senior. Those are team ranks. Those are people connections that are part of a company, and not industry ranks. Industry ranks or industry skill levels are novice, professional, or journeyperson, expert, and that's pretty much it. A mastery, like I said, is the same as expert. It's just you're also a mentor. So those things shouldn't be mixed up. It's silly to sort of mix those things up. So internship. This is where I'm going to start to differentiate between internship and apprenticeship. So internship is a company-specific hiring scheme. It's not industry level. If somebody asks you, what do? You don't say I intern. That's not your title. You do software development, or you're a web developer or a designer or whatever the case is. At a company, you're interning for a company. You have an internship. And so what that means, it's paid or unpaid or whatever the case is, but it's unstructured. They sort of just throw you in the deep end and say, work with the people, you're going to get assigned tasks. These other interns or mid-level people or maybe even senior-level people will help you, get into the system and put tasks together, learn from them in general, but it's unstructured. They just sort of throw you in there. It's not a bad thing. I'm not saying internships are a bad thing. I'm just saying I'm contrasting this to apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is not company-specific. So in one case, if we completely remove the idea of a company altogether, Techlahoma is a perfect example of apprenticeship. We have a lot of mentors, a lot of high-level experts in the industry who are there to help people learn. They're there to answer questions, and in some cases, they're even making these one-on-one connections where they talk to them, every week or every couple of weeks, and they even like throw them curveballs, like, hey, what would you do in this situation? That's like a mentorship/apprenticeship. That's an industry level idea where we're helping each other by forming these connections between somebody who's mastered the craft and people who are novices in the craft. Novices are even, beginning level professionals, 3 or 4 years experience, and they're coming together and they have this more structured understanding of, let's talk about these things very frequently, and I'll also throw you some tests and stuff like that. The goal of apprenticeship is to get to some sort of certification. For software development, there's not as many certifications as there are in other fields, in other engineering type fields. There definitely should be. That's sort of part of where this type of talk is going, where the guild is going. But the goal for an apprenticeship in software engineering is to get you to a level where you have some sort of industry recognition that I interned with this master and learned a lot. So Micah, which is the name of the son for Robert C. Martin, Uncle Bob, Micah interned with Uncle Bob, which is his father, for a long time. And Micah eventually, they actually did an intern. Did I say intern? He was an apprentice of Robert C. Martin. They did an apprenticeship scheme, and he eventually grew and became professional, and then an engineer level person, or what they call it, craftsman. And eventually founded Eighth Light. So Eighth Light is the name of the company, Uncle Bob's son's company. And this apprenticeship is an industry level idea. But at the same time, you can have an apprenticeship and an internship. So I can go into a company where they have an apprenticeship program and I could be interning for them. But if all they're doing is throwing me in the deep end, then the apprenticeship was a lie. But if what they have is some of their senior level people in the company, what they call the senior team lead or whatever the case is, and these people are also experts in the industry, and they are mentoring you and giving you these tests that they do and getting you to the level of like industry level certification or recognition, then they're actually mentoring you, and it's actually an apprenticeship. So you can have the two things at the same time. But they're two different concepts that can happen at the same time. I need to click. That's all the stuff that I just said. I forgot to click over to this screen. But if you were to Google what is an apprenticeship in the United States, you'd probably find the Department of Labor or the IRS definition of apprenticeship. And I have to point out that the IRS is focused on how to tax companies, and the Department of Labor is focused on how to make sure that companies aren't doing bad things with their employees or taking advantage of their employees or whatever the case is. So from their definitions, they conflate the idea of apprenticeship and internship, which is perfectly fine, because if you're dealing with like how pay schemes work, then you're going to be conflating those things. But that's from their perspective. I'm just throwing that out there. Apprenticeship, traditionally speaking, is a relationship between a mentor and a novice. Junior brain surgeon. Junior brain surgeon is one of my most recent favorite things to say, because it doesn't make sense. So a lot of professions inherently communicate experience. So if I say I'm a brain surgeon, that means my experience level is high. That means I am an expert in what I do. You wouldn't say this person's going to do surgery on my brain. They may or may not know all the things they need to know about it, but we'll see how things go. Once you get to brain surgeon level, I said this in my other talk, like the sort of route that you take to become a brain surgeon. It's some school, it's some internship, it's school, it's taking the final test, it's going for a hospital to be a doctor, a general practitioner for a while, it's becoming a general surgeon, and it's eventually becoming specialty. There's a lot. There's a decade or more of work to get to the point of saying you're a brain surgeon. So if you're a brain surgeon, you are an expert at what you do. And I'm not trying to say that a software engineer and a brain surgeon are the same thing. There's obviously a lot of differences between that. But a software engineer is the same thing, where if you were to say that you're a software engineer, that inherently communicates that you are an expert in your field. Junior is junior and seniority. It's a bit of seniority. And seniority mainly applies to the low-skilled labor. So as you're a novice or the lower-level professional or whatever the case is, that's when you start applying things to junior. So if you're a junior brain surgeon, that means that you don't have all the skills yet. So then why are you a brain surgeon? And I use that in the same sense of software engineer. There's no such thing as a junior brain surgeon, just like there's no such thing as a junior software engineer. If you are a software engineer and you go into a company and they gave you a title of junior, then that would just absolutely not make sense. So once you're in a skill position that implies expert, such as software engineer or brain surgeon, then it doesn't make sense to apply those low skill levels of seniority for a company. So looking for a junior expert absolutely does not make sense. So I see these postings a lot for a novice or a junior position. And they say, looking for a junior developer or a junior engineer, whatever the case is, something junior. Looking for a junior developer, cool, 2+ years of experience, that perfectly fine, cool. Also, you have to be like a master of Angular, or have multiple years of experience in specifically React or Angular, or you must be great at solid principles, or whatever the case is. Well, if you're looking for somebody junior, then you shouldn't be looking for somebody who's great in any type of specific skill or whatever the case is. If you go into an interview for a junior position or for a low skill position, somebody who's new to the industry or whatever the case is, and on the job posting they're posting, 40 bananas is what we're paying. We're paying you 40 bananas. Then that job position should not be requiring you to have multiple years of API experience or mastery of API experience, or you have to be really, really good at Python or whatever the case is. The job should really show just that you can do the things that are necessary. You're going to be asking a lot of questions as a junior developer in this thing. Junior denotes that there's not going to be any substantial skill level in any particular thing. Because if you have that skill level, and this is to help out the community here, if you have such a skill level in Angular or React that you can say, I can pretty much handle any task in Angular or React, and I can communicate that, and I can do an interview about it and all that sort of stuff, as I pointed out 5 slides ago or 10 slides ago, whatever that was, that means you're a professional. You're not a junior. If you can communicate those things and you have the skill level that you can have a job requirement that says you must have these skills, these are the required skills, you're not a junior. You're a professional, and you should be paid as such. So these jobs where it says, there's looking for a junior developer who has these skills, they're just trying to underpay you. And it may not be on purpose. A lot of the industry, I'm not like a crazy theory person, but there are corporations definitely that purposely come up with these schemes for job titles and pay schemes and all these sort of things so that they can pay their employees less. I'm not the first one to ever say companies want to pay their employees less. But at the same time, there's also companies that just sort of follow on with what other companies are doing. And there's also people, me for one of them early on, and a lot of other people out there who just follow along. They go to a recruiter, the recruiter says looking for a junior whatever, and you have to have these skills, and they just sort of follow along with it. They don't ever question it. So this talk is to question that and to make sure that we're not getting trolled. We're not getting taken advantage of. Engineers are experts. I sort of talked about this just a second ago. So any job posting with the word engineer, so looking for a software engineer, for example, who can do or full stack development, full stack software engineer, something like that. There's no such thing as a junior engineer. You can't look for a junior engineer or even a mid-level engineer. So if you're looking for a full stack engineer, this person has a lot of skill in all these different things. We're not just talking about somebody who's a junior web developer and they can touch each part of the stack, and it's a small company and they need someone who can do the whole stack. Okay, you can do full stack. We're not just talking about somebody who can fulfill some of these things. But if you're going to an enterprise and you're going to be their full stack software engineer, then you're going to be doing a lot of things. So if somebody says looking for a junior engineer, they're wanting to pay somebody a low amount for a lot of responsibility. They're just using the words wrong. In the end, they're just using the words wrong. But there's a cost to that. There's a cost to using these words wrong. I don't know if I say it in the next one now. And the cost. This is like the end of the talk essentially. I'll answer that question in a second. But the cost of allowing recruiters or HR departments or managerial people to use these words, looking for expert or engineer or whatever the case is, a junior expert or a junior engineer, is that if I have, let's say, 3 years of experience, I'm still pretty much a novice, but I'm professional. I'm pretty good at what I do. You know what I mean? And I see this job posting, and it says my current job role is just web developer or web developer 1 or first layer of web developer, or some weird title my company came up with. And I see this job posting. It says looking for engineer, software engineer, and I'm like, cool, let's go do that. I've got 3 years of experience. According to their requirements, it's 2+ years of experience for a software engineer. You get that title, you get that job, you nail the interview, and then you get the title, and now on your resume you can put software engineer. Way better than software developer. I'm going to get paid so much more, except you're not. Instead of 60 bananas, you're getting paid 70 bananas or whatever the case is. Well, engineer is the top. Engineer is the brain surgeon of software development. So you now have this engineer title, and now if you Google all these statistics about average pay range for software engineer, then that pay range, because you've taken that, has lowered. So you've raised and it's lowered. The average is lower. That's I'm happy for you for getting paid more money. You should probably be getting paid even more than you are for whatever your skill level is. But also, where do you go from here? Where do you personally go from software engineer? Like I said, senior software engineer isn't the thing. That's a team role. That when you go into a company, you're a software engineer, they make you their senior. That's a team role. But where do you go from software engineer in the industry? You can't go up from that. So therefore, you have set your bar at 60 bananas. And that's software engineer. You can't go anywhere from that. So you're hurting yourself. You're enabling recruiters and stuff like that to hurt us, to hurt the industry. And so we need to have this paradigm shift to make sure that we're following these definitions and these principles, and we're holding ourselves to these standards, not to be afraid to say I'm a novice, or I'm just a professional. I'm just a software developer, a normal professional, or at some point saying I'm an expert. Therefore, I should be making 300,000 to 500,000 bananas, or whatever the case is. Because if you lower the word expert software engineer to being paid 60 bananas, you're hurting yourself for the future, and you're hurting, the rest of the industry. We don't want to enable the recruiters and the HR people and stuff like that to be watering down these terms. I'll do my conclusion real quick. So yeah, job postings, seniority is okay in job details as long as they're saying we're looking for the job title who's going to come in and be the senior person. So you're going to have a lot more experience, leadership experience and stuff like that. We're going to bring you in, we're going to be testing you for leadership experience, and then putting you in charge of a team or whatever the case is. But seniority is not something that's industry-wide. It just happens to be in the job title for this job posting because you're going to be whatever. If you're hired on as a senior software engineer, and then you go into a company and you're just one of the normal developers and there's a team lead above you, then you're not senior by time at the company, nor are you senior by role. So it doesn't make sense. Yeah, that's pretty much it. We don't want to cheapen these words. We want to keep them as they are, and we want to have this paradigm shift where we're helping our industry grow and have these standards. So we have to hold ourselves accountable to these standards. So yeah, thanks for coming. I'm going to go ahead and make a link to a Google Meet so that anyone on here can jump on there and continue this discussion. Kelvin actually said, what about a mixture? I've heard the terms junior to mid or mid to senior categories before. I think this talk is just setting the foundation. And I think mixtures are great. I think especially hiring into somewhere that says mid to senior or something like that. You're hiring into a position to that, knowing that you're coming on as like a mid-level developer, and that they're going to be pushing you to become one of the team leads or whatever the case is. We need somebody that we can bring on as a mid-level and who we're going to push into being a team lead or something like that. I'm not saying that job titles need to be black and white and have exactly these terms. I'm just saying let's set our foundation for these terms, and then we'll grow from there. As long as these terms are sort of set in stone, what does professional mean? What does novice mean? And what does senior and junior mean? Then from there we can have all kinds of mixtures of terms and all the case stuff like that.